Okay, it's 9:02. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you very much for spending your Saturday night with us, with John and the team and his team. And tonight, we are going to even release more information to you. John is always does wonderful job. My name is Sophia. I'm IvyCompass CEO. We're very happy to make another presentation. So this introduction will be in Chinese. So give me a moment, just quickly, as some people might be coming as a new friends, new audience. So quickly introduce the organization we are volunteer for. The organization we are volunteer, me and Allison were heavily spending our time is called AFI. AFI is a nonprofit organization. Let me use Chinese quickly. That way I can move a little bit more quick and smooth. 所以影响力联合会呢是 AFI 呢是501C3的一个纽约的成立的非营利公益组织。我们的这个社团呢宗旨是通过知识的分享来提高群体的整体素质，同时宣传和鼓励以华裔为主的亚裔群体对当地社会的贡献，增强亚裔对主流社会的影响力，并提高亚裔的社会地位。AFI 自疫情以来举办过400场讲座，听众呢超过了15万，来自各个州和不同的国家，社区呢有3万多华人的家庭。欢迎大家持续关注我们，持续参与我们的知识分享。我非常想再一次强调，就是实际上您的孩子毕业了也好，没有毕业也好，或者孩子还小，其实通过听这些知识分享，可以很好的掌握、了解这个美国这些精英学校他们到底在 looking for what kind of type of quality the student。那你也可以通过了解这些知识呢，可以帮助在培养孩子过程当中心里头比较有数，做到指导方针正确和不焦虑。那么 AFI 呢是通过4个板块来服务于我们社区的。第一个板块呢是我们成年人的公益讲座，通过这种影响力的人物采访啊，金融投资科技以及其他行业的这种分享。因为我们的发起人 Angeline 黄小红女士是金融行业的一位精英，那么她也是通过把她的这个知识圈和人脉带到我们这个平台上面，让更多的人能够享受到这种职场上的沟通啊、领导力的分享啊，及其一些社会的热点的一些访谈。第二个板块呢，也是她非常注重创建的是 IvyCompass。IvyCompass 呢是一个青少年的公益组织，它呢会注重在联合利的青少年的 SD 领导力培训，包括一些财商和投资的系列课程教育，包括今年夏天他会在这个NIMA 举办的企业家和商业的这个一些系列的夏令营啊，包括这个可持续发展的投资大赛等等，都是有助于帮助我们年轻人更加全面的发展自己的 soft skill， 能够成为社会的栋梁之才。第3个板块呢是我们的亲子学院 TCPC。这个委员长所带领的机构也是非常的活跃，帮助了我们很多的家庭，包括自闭症啊、ADHD 的一些多动症的一些家庭，帮助他们能够更好的培养我们的孩子和互相能够抱团取暖啊，解决一些该解决的一些心理上的一些需要帮助的一些问题。第4大板块呢也是非常活跃的是我们的生活健康系列。我们有每天免费线上的健身课程，包括瑜伽呀、舞蹈啊、美术啊、瘦身啊、街舞等等。种花种菜的程老师也非常活跃的帮助大家增强这方面的知识，让我们生活更加丰富的多彩。那就是这4大板块是我们大家都很熟悉的。那么今天晚上的 feature 呢是 IvyCompass。IvyCompass 也是多次能够带领大家来学习一些以这个升学为主的一些信息和知识，其实它的这个知识量还是蛮大的。我希望大家就是能够持续的来关注我们的这些知识分享。首先 IvyCompass 呢，我们是通过我们这样的一个平台，能够通过我们的知识面和社会经验，帮助大家去筛选和挑选口碑最好的那些藤校前招生官，还有包括一些独立的升学顾问，还有艺术音乐作品集的辅导，以及其他的一些资源的教育资源对接给我们的家庭。同时呢，我们 IvyCompass 还特别的注重培养孩子的软实力的提升，包括社会影响力啊、科研呀，还有背景提升啊，这些方面都是其实全面的。除了这个 academic 的一些学习和重点培养以外， 能够让我们的孩子不仅仅成为一个学习的机器，而是能够在学习的基础之上，让自己的能力全面的提升。那么包括我们你看在 IvyCompass 这个平台上，除了John以外，我们还有其他的一些导师。我们今年2022年、2023年的录取的这个 cycle 是非常的可喜的。普林斯顿呀、MIT 啊、芝加哥啊、CMU 啊、Rice、Caltech、Stanford 所有这些 Top 的这个学校，我们都有学生很好的被这些学校所看重而录取，继续进步下一步的培养。包括今天晚上的这个讲座，我们是录音的哈，也是录像的，所以在我们的网站上，您可以持续的去寻找以前其他的一些分享，包括 John 的，包括这个 Don， 还有 Demi， 还有 Jason Paul 几次的这个分享。您如果想回复重新去学习和观看的话，您是可以在我们的网站上搜索到的。那今天晚上呢，特别的高兴又邀请到了 John 以及他的团队 Christy， 还有其他的一些associate consultant 来跟我们大家一起共同探索 John 用他最核心的一些他在工作辅导过程当中，他是用什么样的方式方法在真正的帮助我们的学生。他也是被我们 AFI 平台上评为最受欢迎的升学讲座啊，每次他的讲座大家都是收获满满，他的这个分享也是干货满满。那么今天晚上您可以从他的这个工作方式方法和一些透露，其实内部的非常着实的信息和一些 private 的这个 information 来帮助您探索到他是如何实实在在的所以选择导师特别重要。我一直跟家长分享，外面的这个机构特别多，这个行业真的是鱼龙混杂。有的人是实实在在知道自己在做什么，帮助孩子真的增强他的这个竞争力。那有的机构可能把前面的话说得很好听，但是后面的执行起来可能不一定那么的扎实和实实在在。所以我觉得今天我也不多说，就把这个平台现在交给 John， 让 John 和他的 team 来分享他的这些干货John, I made a quick Chinese introduction for you. So now I give the floor to you, so your team can really give your private information, which I think you release too much, but then it's good. It's good to let people know we are solid. We're no hiding. We're not those company, those agency lure people in, have them paying the mass of the money and then doesn't do what they're supposed to or doesn't know what they're supposed to do. So let me give the floor to you. I will stop sharing. Thank you so much for your time, and Christy.
Thank you so much, Sophia. Much appreciated. Let me share my screen. Hold on one second. Okay, can you see my screen, Sophia?
Yes.
All right, fantastic. Okay, great. So excited to get started here. First and foremost, thank you, Christy, for being here. So we do have one of my team members here. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for taking some time and energy out of your weekend to spend some time learning about college admissions. As you guys know, my name is John Morganelli. I'm the founder of Ivy League Admissions, LLC. I'm the author of Growing Ivy, How to Crack the Code on Elite College Admissions. And of course, I'm the former director of admissions from Cornell University's College of Arts and Sciences. This presentation is titled Benchmarking the College List and Common App Review. The presentation was designed to illustrate, number one, the most important aspects of the strategic work that we do as a team. Two, to introduce students to the college application at this stage, we're just kind of getting into July. This is when we're starting to introduce the Common App and all the work we'll be doing this summer and this fall to our rising seniors. So I thought it was a good time to discuss that. And then also, I wanted to review the metrics that we use to benchmark the college list, which of course is really quite important. If you don't benchmark your list effectively or correctly, your story may not land and you might not get the answer you're looking for as it relates to your admissions decision. So that's really important, and I'll go over that this evening. Of course, in light of the recent Supreme Court decision, in addition to the noted presentation topics, I'm happy to answer any questions related to the ruling regarding affirmative action during the Q&A. I was interviewed on NBC 10 Washington last night about this and look forward to answering your questions. Okay, so I want to take just a few moments here to introduce my IvyCompass team. I am fortunate to have hired and trained a fantastic team of consultants that understand my philosophy and help our students and families effectively execute our plan. I think the IvyCompass administration, Sophia, Allison, probably can attest to how particular I am about the people who are working with me. And I'm particular about it because I have a very specific perspective on how you actually move the needle. And I need people who want to spend the time and energy to understand that perspective. And we have found that in this group. And then, of course, in addition to the time and energy to understand my perspective, they all are very intelligent with very impressive educational histories on their own. As you can see on the screen, Quentin, associate counselor with a educational background from Johns Hopkins. Christy, who's here joining us today with her educational background from Harvard University. Lori, who's from University of Notre Dame, and then Isaac, who is from Columbia. And I recognize that there is a typo on Columbia. My apologies, I meant to change it, but I didn't have time right before the presentation, so apologies for that. Okay, before we jump into the substance of college admissions, for those of you who are not already familiar with me from other presentations, I want to just briefly introduce my own background here. I've worked at 3 different institutions here in the US. I've served in a leadership position at all 3 of those institutions. They're all different, and it's given me a really nice understanding of the cross-section of college admissions in the US. Throughout my decade in college admissions, I personally reviewed and was responsible in my own region for over 30,000 applications. I was fortunate when I was at Lehigh University that I was invited down to the University of Pennsylvania, where at that time they were just rolling out their committee-based evaluation feedback model, whereby 2 readers are reading the same app at the same time. I was invited down with colleagues from Amherst, Swarthmore, and a few other schools to review that model. So I have really good understanding of, specifically how Penn does their work. But of course, this was a new model that got rolled out by many institutions across the country, and I have a good understanding of how that works. I was fortunate when I was the director of admissions at Cornell for the College of Arts and Sciences. I was unaware, actually, prior to getting to Cornell, that every 2 years, the Ivy League colleges and universities, plus MIT, Duke, and Stanford, this is called the Ivy Plus group, they get together on one of the college campuses every 2 years, and they have an enrollment summit, usually 3 or 4 days, where the deans and directors from each of those schools are reviewing all aspects of enrollment management. I can just imagine what that meeting is going to be like post Supreme Court decision. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of conversation around procedures and protocols related to diversity. But I have a really good understanding of, of course, all of the Ivy League plus MIT, Duke, and Stanford, just based on the fact that we hosted it in Ithaca when I was there in 2017. I had access to all of the deans and directors, plus because it was in Ithaca, my whole staff was there. So I had an opportunity to have my team sit in on all the presentations and take notes. Finally, I was appointed as an Ivy League admissions director at the age of 32. And I'm really proud of that, mostly not because of the age, but because of the way I got there, right? And the way I got there was I had a perspective, I had a story, right, about how I impacted Lehigh University's college admissions team and their data. And I told that story at Cornell, and I was successful in getting the job, and I was successful when I had the job. And so now we segue to students, and it's really the same thing. We're talking about a story, right? How do we tell a story about their unique experiences that will differentiate them in this process? While I was the director, of course, I had the final review authority of over 20,000 apps per year for the College of Arts and Sciences. I did supervise our staff of 80% PhD who are used to be faculty. And then I hired and trained over 40 application readers per year at Cornell, a few less per year when I was at Lehigh, but having trained many application readers throughout my career. Okay, after presentations, I try to collect feedback. One of the things that I often get is that some people had a difficult time following, mostly because of a lack of familiarity with terms. So I want to go over some of the definitions that I'll be referring to in this presentation. If there are terms that are unfamiliar or I go too quick, please jot them down and I can define them for you later. So the first term is academic direction. That's a term that I use a lot. It's important to understand what I mean by that. Oftentimes when I'm talking about the academic direction early in a student's high school career, I'm talking broadly about the academic direction. Are they interested in STEM areas? Are they interested in social sciences? Are they interested in humanities? Right? That's kind of broad academic direction. And at some point, we narrow that to specific prospective majors, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Oh, the next number 2 is majors. So majors. there are two different types of majors that I'm referring to. There aren't two different actual types of majors, but when I'm speaking, I refer to two different terms. One is prospective major and one is actual major. Your prospective major is the major that's going on the Common app or Coalition app or whatever app you use. It's prospective because you have not declared it yet, right? When you are in college, generally second semester of your sophomore year of college, I actually did serve as an academic advisor in my first collegiate experience. And when you declare your major, that's usually second semester of sophomore year of college, that's your actual major. What you put down on the app, that's your prospective major. And it is important because you're telling the reader what you think you are going to do. And that reader is making qualitative decisions based upon what they think you said you're going to do. So your prospective major is important, but it's important to differentiate that from the real major, the one that you declare when you get there. And we'll talk about the difference and why that matters as we go through the presentation. Number 3 is holistic review. Holistic review is the review process that highly selective colleges and universities use in the United States. It's important to note that most universities outside of the United States do not engage in holistic review. Holistic review versus non-holistic review. And in non-holistic review, it's really a quantitative conversation. They're looking at standardized test scores, your GPA, the curriculum you took, right? A quantitative conversation. In a holistic review, it's quantitative and qualitative. The quantitative data is a bar of entry. The qualitative data about how you spend your time and energy and what you bring to a community, those are generally where the needle rises and falls, assuming you meet the bars of entry at the institutions we're talking about. So holistic review is the review process in the United States. It's also important to note, holistic review does not mean well-rounded. For some reason, I think students, parents, guidance counselors hear this term holistic review and they associate it with being well-rounded. It's really not the same thing. Holistic review means that they're going to look at a lot of different things, right? About how you spend your time during the summer, what clubs you're in, what research you did, but it doesn't mean that you need to be well-rounded. And we'll talk about whether well-rounded is a good idea or not as we move forward. And then personal statement or college essay. This is probably the essay that you hear about the most. This is the essay that gets sent to every single school. It's the prompt, if you apply through the Common App, it's a 650-word essay, and that's your personal statement or college essay. If you apply through the Coalition app, they also have a personal statement. It's a different word count, but this is the essay that goes to every single school. In some ways, it's very important because it goes to every single school, right? So you want to put your best foot forward if every single institution is going to be reading it. Of course, because it's going to every single institution, sometimes it loses its impact to the reader as compared to the supplemental essays, right? These are your institutional specific, if you see number 5, your institutional specific essays, right? Cornell has their own, Columbia has their own, Harvard has their own. And so if you asked me to grade which one's more important, I would say the supplemental essay question is actually more important, but the personal statement does go to every single school you apply to. And so it's important to understand the differences between these essay types. And then application story, narrative theme. I use these terms often, interchangeably. I know I use the term academic direction. When I'm referring to the application story or narrative or theme, what I'm saying is that all of the things you do, right? The app itself, the curriculum choices, the recs that you choose, the essays that you write, the activity list that you will note, they are all coming together to develop a story, a theme, a narrative, whether you like it or not. Now, sometimes that story, narrative, or theme is unclear to the reader because the pieces don't really add up to something that's clear to the reader. And thus, if that's the case, you really have to spend time and energy making sure that you're able to effectively communicate your story. Sometimes the evidence lines up very clearly. The reader can just glance at the activity list and have a pretty good understanding of the way the students spent their time and energy within the context of a prospective major. It's important from my perspective, if we can, that we do have evidence that supports a specific direction. And if we don't have that because we didn't know about that in time, or the student was not aware of the strategy, then what we want to do is we want to take disparate pieces of experience and ask ourselves whether we can put them together and create connections and synergies that other people don't see. The goal for that is to create this story or narrative or theme. And then the last two phrases here are overrepresented academic major and underrepresented academic major. These are important because they're fundamental to the strategy that I employ. That is that to some degree, there are certain majors that for certain it used to be for certain ethnic groups. We'll talk about whether that has changed or not, but for certain ethnic groups, for certain gender, even for certain high schools, that specific majors like computer science or pre-med, the reader sits down to read that app and they already have a preconceived notion of the chances of the student because of the prospective major and because of how competitive it is. And so we talk a lot here, my team and I, and with our students, about what is that sweet spot, right? Where we are thinking about the students' interests and we're considering that, and we're making sure we're not wasting their time, but we're also thinking about the competitiveness of these areas and making sure they actually get where they want to go. Okay. All right, so now we'll jump into the presentation. I want to take a moment here to describe the application process by way of analogy. There are two analogies that generally make sense for me. The first one you can see on the screen is that this is like applying for a job. Now, I know a lot of the students out here have not applied for many jobs quite yet. Maybe you have for some summer jobs. Parents, of course, many of you have or have applied for jobs in the past. The first thing that parents have done or students you should do if you're going to apply for a job is look at the position description, right? How would you know if you want the job if you don't look at the position description, right? So you need to know what are the demands of this specific position. If you asked for, went to a restaurant, right, and you have a job as, busboy or a waiter, right? I would want to know what is the difference between the responsibilities, right, as it relates to this job. And the only way I would possibly know that would be by looking at the position description. So the position description illustrates the demands of the job. And the second part of that is, if I know the demands of the job, I then can consider my own experiences within the context of the demands for that job, right? So when we're applying to college, there is no position description, of course, because we're not actually applying for a job. But as we noted earlier, we're building an academic story, an academic narrative, and there are prospective majors. Our prospective majors are the position descriptions in this analogy. They're not position descriptions, they're departmental descriptions. We need to know if you're applying to the communications department or the history department or the anthropology department, what is this department actually doing? What classes are they offering? What research are they doing? How is the faculty spending their time as it relates to development of workshops? How are the students engaging in clubs and organizations? We need to know that because that's our position description. That tells us what is valued by the department. So you can imagine for a moment, if you're applying for a job or parents, you're hoping to get a promotion. Imagine for a moment, you peeked at the position description a couple years in advance, right? I have a job as X, I'd like to get a job as XY. Well, what does the position description say for XY? I peek at it. Now I know, oh, it demands this, it demands that. Now, while I'm in my current job, I'm spending time and energy preparing for that later position description that I actually want, right? So I'm looking, anytime there's an opportunity to volunteer for a responsibility that I think would serve as good evidence that I'm prepared for that promotion, that next job, I'm doing it. If I'm offered an opportunity that doesn't seem to prepare me for that next position or job, I'm ignoring it because it doesn't actually move me further towards my goal. So here, we don't have a position description, but we're peeking at the departmental description, and we are asking ourselves, we're running the departmental description as a rubric, and we're asking ourselves, should I be in this club? Should I go to this summer program? Should I investigate this research question? The answer to that question, parents ask me all the time in their first meetings, like, is this a good research question? Should I go to this summer program? They probably think I'm holding back information when I say I don't know, but I'm not. I don't know, right? Because I don't know whether or not I don't know the position description. I don't know the departmental description yet that we're trying to match to. I need to know that in order to know whether or not these pieces make sense within the context of the academic story. The second analogy that I use here is kind of a legal analogy. And I use that because when we're building a story, what do we need in order for the reader to believe the story? We need evidence, right? Like in law, you need evidence in front of a case. So if you're sitting there and you have a case and there's a jury, and you're trying to prove your innocence or otherwise, you're presenting evidence. What are we doing, right? We're standing in front of a selection committee, not actually standing there, but your application is standing there in front of that selection committee. And we are presenting evidence, engagement experiences, activities that illustrate that you have spent time and energy that prepare you to contribute something, not to take something, but to contribute something of value to the academic department that you're trying to build around. So what do we do if that's what we're actually, if this is like applying for a job, if that's the analogy, we're trying to build evidence, that's the analogy, what do we need to do? The first step is to determine the prospective major. I consider this to be part of the magic of our team. Determining a prospective major is actually quite complex. Most students make this decision literally right before they apply to college, maybe as a junior, or sometimes actually when they're sitting down with the app, they're pulling up the list of majors and they're saying like, oh yeah, I kind of like physics, I kind of like X. That's a really bad idea, right? Like you need to know before you sit down with an app. I would argue you need to know well before you sit down with an app what your prospective major is so that you can understand how you're going to use the experiences you have so far to support that major. So step one, determine your prospective major, and that's a complex process that we'll talk about in a little more detail as we move forward. Number two, we need to develop a robust engagement list, right? That's important because that's the evidence. The magic that we bring to this, from my perspective as it relates to engagement, is that we are focused on localizing that engagement, right? We want to make it locally relevant to your community. There are lots of questions out there that are academic in nature, but they're not relevant to the community that you're part of. It is important that it's relevant to your community because that's going to move the reader. If it's irrelevant to your community, the reader's eyes just start to glaze over with this kind of like, okay, yeah, it's just another student trying to show us that they're interested, but it doesn't land the same way when it's not relevant to you and your community. And then the third the third step here, so you determine your prospective major, you develop a robust engagement list, and then the final part here is that we need to develop relevant / interesting questions about the issues and experiences that we have engaged in. So, maybe I'm in a club, maybe I found an article in my local newspaper about something happening in my community. How do we develop questions that illustrate our intellectual interests about these relevant community happenings? Okay, so we'll dive into that in a little more detail as we move forward here. Okay, so as noted in step number one is to identify the prospective major, right? That's the first thing that we need to do. Why is that? The reason we need to identify the prospective major is that the first question that all of the colleges or universities that you apply to are going to ask is what college type are you applying to? Right? That's the first question on all of the supplements. If you apply to Columbia, you apply to Penn, they want to know, are you applying to the Arts and Sciences College? Are you applying to the Engineering College? Or are you applying to the Business College? Those are your three most common undergraduate colleges. If you're applying to Cornell, they have a bunch of other undergraduate colleges. They want to know whether you're applying to College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, the College of Human Ecology, the College of Industrial Labor Relations, right? So knowing that all these different college types exist is really important, and knowing what college type you're applying to is fundamentally important before you start. Once you know the college type, right, arts and sciences, engineering, or business, the second question that we're asking is, what is the prospective major that you're going to identify under that college type? So how do we go about identifying the prospective major? The questions that I ask when we're going through this process are as follows. Number one, what is the student interested in? I do want to know what the student is interested in, of course, because we don't want to waste time. Just because certain majors are easier to get into. When I say get into, I mean get into the university, not get in the major, right? That's declaring the major down the road. I'm talking about if you use a prospective major of Greek literature versus a prospective major of computer science, it's, I think most people recognize, significantly less competitive on the Greek literature side, mostly because, number one, within the context of the three areas, humanities, social sciences, and STEM, humanities generally is the least competitive from a quantitative data perspective. And then if you drill down deeper under the humanities, Greek literature is one of the least popular programs that most universities have. So does it make sense then? Should everyone in the audience just kind of drop what they're doing and begin to focus on Greek literature in high school to build the evidence? Probably not, right? Like that would feel like a lot of wasted time and energy for students who have no interest in that. So we start with what the student's interested in so that we can be somewhat close to that space as we're building our evidence. The second question we're going to ask is, how has he or she already spent her time and energy, right? If the student is in 9th grade, maybe they did do some things, but quite honestly, at that stage, it doesn't really matter because we have so much more time. We have all of 10th, all of 11th, some of 12th to build evidence. If the student's in 11th grade or a rising 12th grader, then the way they already spent their time and their energy is probably the most important thing. I still want to know what they're interested in, but honestly, what they're interested in is less relevant than how they've spent their time and their energy, because they could be interested in, let's just say for argument's sake, someone says, I'm really interested in engineering. Well, if you're in 11th grade and you're not in any robotics clubs, you've never gone to an engineering-oriented summer program, you have no research in this space, there's no competition, it's too late if you're trying to go to an Ivy League school. That doesn't mean you couldn't become an engineer. There are lots of paths to become an engineer, but if you're trying to go to an Ivy League school with no evidence in 11th grade, it's too late. If you have no evidence for any area in 11th grade, is it too late for all areas? No, not necessarily. Different areas have different levels of expectation, not because of the information that they expect you to know, right? They don't actually expect you to have a relevant engineering background. They want you to have a relevant math background, but you don't need to have a relevant engineering background to be in an engineering college. So that's really not what it's about. It's really about the bar of entry that's been created by your competition, right? It's not like, well, you must be in a robotics club in order to be successful as a prospective engineer at Cornell. No, it's that the bar of entry has been created by all of your competition, with 95% have done this already. And if you don't, then you need to show something more, right? If you're going to be able to earn an offer over that student. So really important to understand, how has the student already spent their time and energy? And we'll go into that in a little more detail as we move forward. Question 3, I ask, what is the universe of possibility based on the time and energy spent, right? So, here's the list of college experiences the student has, and I will show you in a moment. I go through and I ask myself, how flexible is this experience, and what area could I create evidence for based upon it? Number 4, right? Once I've done that, I ask myself, well, here's the list of prospective majors based on the way the student has spent their time and energy. And now I'm going to overlay, how competitive are the options that have been identified in that universe of opportunity. So let's just say, for argument's sake, I go through the activity list and I see there's 4 things for computer science and 2 things for public policy, right? Well, 4 is better than 2. So you could argue it makes sense to go computer science. But when we overlay the competitiveness of computer science versus public policy, now we have a question. Does it really make sense to go computer science? We have to sit down and have a conversation about that because of the competitiveness of the space. And then, of course, finally, once we've walked through those 4 steps, what's the student interested in? How has he or she spent her time and energy? What's the universe of possibility? How competitive is that universe? We will then define the most strategic path forward for the student. I want to show you an example here. You can see on the slide, it says quantity, quality, flexibility of engagement, and it says pre-portfolio engagement list. So I'm going to click on this here, and what I'm showing you is before we built the student's portfolio, and you will see a portfolio a bit later, before we built that story for the student, we had an engagement list, experiences of the student. So what I did, and I'll click on this now and show you, what you see here is, let me make it a little bit bigger, a listing of experiences. So we'll start with
John.
Yes.
We're not able to see you clicked it.
Oh, apologies, right here. Can you see that?
Yes.
All right, sorry about that. Okay, so what we have here is a list of experiences, and what you'll find is that at the top, if you were able to read that, I don't know how small it is on your screen, is it says in the italics, eventually we determined that we could develop a successful prospective communications major application with this activity list. Now, I just want to note to you what I saw when I looked at it to begin with. Number 1, speech and debate club. What is speech and debate club, right? It's, from my perspective, super flexible. Humanities, social science, many areas of humanities and many areas of social science that I could connect that to if necessary. So you see in red, I noted humanities/social science, flexible. Mock trial club, again, foundational in-school club organization, super flexible. And many humanities areas, many social science areas, and sometimes if I needed to, maybe even a STEM area, I could connect for mock trial. Now, some people might say, how could you connect mock trial to that many areas? But if you do this every day, we see the path forward. That's why I want to know everything the student has done, not just what they think is relevant, because sometimes we see things that they don't see. The third thing the student did was a research internship in behavioral economics. at first, the title of it is called Leisure, Time, Deliberateness, and Subjective Well-Being. The reason the student did this is because originally the student wanted cognitive science and possibly behavioral economics, but really cognitive science. And what happened was, and you'll see this on the portfolio later, the student got I can't remember what the grade was, maybe a B- or something in math in his junior year of high school that led me to believe that it wouldn't make sense for us to focus on a STEM area where they're going to put a more hyper focus on the math and science scores in high school. And so we had to make a strategic change based upon what the grades looked like and the way the student had already spent their time and energy. So this was really designed, this internship in behavioral economics was actually designed to investigate cognitive science, which is what the student wanted. I dove into the idea of this deliberateness and eventually used this to connect to communication through the idea that communicating to someone who is actively paying attention, right, deliberate, versus someone who is passively paying attention is different, right? Communicating to those types of people are different. And I saw this, right, by seeing the title and then reading the abstract and asking myself, how could we reconstitute this research to support a different area? At that time, I had already had communications in my mind from other things that you'll see on this activity list. Number 4 you see is action research for community change. This is a club the student was in. Again, action research for community change is pretty broad, probably can fit a wide variety of social science perspective major directions. But once I realized what it was and what the topics were, one of the things you'll see, we had asked the student to start a podcast. The club itself, Action Research for Community Change, isn't really a communications-oriented club. But when you add a podcast about the community action, we can turn it into a communications-oriented club. It couldn't be the focal point, but it certainly can serve as contextual evidence. And then the student went to number 5 is research again. The student had done research on the efficacy of public service announcements. Now, this again was actually about cognitive science. The research was about the memorability of public service announcements, right? Which was a cognitive science perspective. But of course, like the communication theory around how effective is the PSA, the public service announcement, there's lots of intellectual angles to build off of that. So when I saw the efficacy of public service announcements, I started to think, we might be able to make a shift here to communications. Then I started to ask myself, well, if I did that, what would I do with action for research for community change? Could I connect this research related to behavioral economics? Will the 2 clubs support it? Yes. And then at the bottom, you see there's a few other things. Exploring psychology. Can I connect psychology to communication theory related to effective and efficient communication? Yes, definitely can. Student was in Mind Your Mind, which was a social science oriented club as well about mindfulness. Can I connect that to communications? Yes, I can. And then you see a few kind of programmatic experiences. Student had a Leading for Life program, which is just a leadership program, which we connected to communications as well. Student did a social psychology program in Columbia. There's lots of overlap between social psychology and communication theory. We connected it. And then the last thing you see, Genes and Diseases and Symptoms, was a course at Brown. I didn't see the value. That was just deleted right off the activity list, did not add to the story. So really important, I don't know if this is helpful. It's the first time I've actually done this in a presentation, but this is the process that my team and I go through with students all the time, which is take a disparate group of experiences and ask ourselves, based on the grades, based on the competitiveness of the spaces, what's the most strategic pathway forward that we can create intellectual connections, but also that it will represent the student well when they look at the grades, they look at the curriculum, etc. Okay. Next slide. Once we know the prospective major, Christy probably can attest, and she probably smiles inside when she says this, like once we know the prospective major, everything else becomes way more clear. Pre-knowing the prospective major, like I can't answer any questions, but once we know that prospective major, game over. Like all of a sudden, everything becomes quite clear in how we're going to build the story. So first and foremost, of course, students need engagement in foundational experiences, right? So clubs, summer programs, sometimes, Christy and I hear from students all the time, we'll say, oh, you're interested in, let's just say economics. There's an economics club at your school. Why aren't you in it? And they'll say, because it doesn't do anything. It's a boring club. The leadership is poor. The club coordinator doesn't show up. None of that matters. This school is your community, right? And you need to engage in these experiences. They serve as the foundation. If the experiences are poor, one of two things can happen. The first would be, of course, you make them better, right? Like, okay, this is a poor club. I'm going to try my best, whether I assume a leadership position or not. I'm going to try to contribute something of value in our conversations with our students. We talk about that a lot, of course. But sometimes it doesn't even matter about changing things or contributing. Sometimes it's just about being there and adding context to your activity list, right? A good research question is a good research question, regardless of what else is on the activity list. But it doesn't land the same way if the evidence on the activity list doesn't support it. So if we develop a research question about homelessness, and there's nothing on that activity list that leads us to believe that there's something interesting about housing scarcity, or not even interesting, but intellectually interesting about how to solve the problem. There's nothing there. There's no volunteerism. There's no summer programs. We just have one random research question that will not land the way it needs to land. We need context. And when you have context, meaning like I'm in a club and this club maybe doesn't do anything, but it's on my activity list and it seems to support the direction I'm going, now your research can have more meaning. So it's really important to have the contextual foundational experiences necessary. The second area where our students stand out from my perspective is in the intentionality related to making sure that students investigate issues in their community that are actually relevant and connected to their area of academic interest. So, how do you localize your investigation? How do you make it relevant? Many times students, especially from when students go to high-powered high schools, you see these kind of very big experiences, global experiences, where they're studying abroad in high school, and those experiences, I'm not saying they're not good, they're very good, and they're developmental for many students, but they often don't land as overly genuine to the reader because it feels like the student's privilege or their parents or something led them there, and it wasn't necessarily the intellectual curiosity of the topic that led them to it. We want to make them believe, whether it's true or not, right, that the intellectual curiosity of the student led them to the experiences. And so we start by thinking about how to localize our understanding of that topic. Now, some topics are easier than others. If we're talking about public policy, like, of course, everything is public policy, and that's happening in your community every day. I mean, most students honestly still struggle with finding a local public policy issue, and we spend a lot of time and energy finding those things and developing research questions around them. But those are relatively easy as compared to, I'm a prospective physics student. Now let's investigate physics in our local community. But there are certainly many ways to do that, and I think it's really quite important. Many times what we do is we literally, you could see on the slide, we pull up Google and we start searching in the news, right? In your community, say you live in Princeton, New Jersey. Like, I need to know if you're a physics student applying as a prospective physics student. I have two right now. One's actually in Princeton. One is in, they're about 10 miles from the San Andreas fault line in California, right? And the student in California, we were talking about this localized investigation. They decided they're going to do, how do the physics behind a building and how do we make it more earthquake resistant? Okay, great. I mean, if you live near the San Andreas fault line, that makes a ton of locally relevant sense for a physics student. I told that exact story, right, to one of my clients who's a prospective physics student in Princeton, New Jersey, and he said, great, I'm going to do that too. I'm going to do earthquake resistance. That doesn't work, right? Like, I mean, I don't live too far from Princeton, New Jersey, and I don't immediately think of earthquakes as an issue related in New Jersey. And so the localization of this doesn't work from my perspective. So, that is one example, but it's really important that the student be aware of what's happening in their community. Now, when we're talking about, let's just say for argument's sake, we're talking about, public economics or public policy, then oftentimes it's not actually that hard. We don't have to wonder whether this is happening in your community. There's housing insecurity in every community. There's educational inequity in every community. So sometimes we're not trying to figure out whether it exists. We're trying to find the exact article that illustrates the players, who's involved in the conversation, etc. So you can see in this, I think hopefully you guys can see the localized investigation document here. You can see this was an email. This was sent by Quentin, one of our associate counselors here. The student happens to live in Canada. And the student was interested in, we're talking about kind of an understanding of housing insecurity. And so what we did here is we found an article. You can see the article is, it's our Central Park, uproar rises over location of new Toronto homes. And what we did here is we said this article illustrates the specific issue and identifies a few components we want to consider in our research. This specific article does that, right? And so in addition to now, okay, we identified an article, the article is telling us that this is a problem, that there are real issues related to housing inequity in this community. In addition to just reading about it, we want to get real world conversation going. And that really creates this very genuine feel. And oftentimes we find things that you just can't find in an article or you can't find online. So the student interviewed a zoning officer, interviewed 2 council members, interviewed the city deputy director of housing, right? These interviews, and they weren't actually, I think only one of them was a real interview. The rest were emails with interview questions. And when we look at the content of those, that helps us, that informs our perspective on the localization of the research question, and it will make the story significantly more genuine when it's time to actually execute on it. So localization is important. We spend time both looking through news articles, and we spend time making sure that we look through, we have conversations, we look through council notes. A lot of times you'll find, like in committees and councils, they have these notes, and these notes show us the real intimate problems that are happening in the communities. Those intimate, smaller problems are the ones that often really make for good stories. Okay, next slide. All right. Number 3, what makes us unique, right? So we're focused on the prospective major, right? Number 1, we're going through that really in-depth process to make sure that we understand the students' experiences within the context of the competitiveness, et cetera, right? After that, we're making sure that we're developing localized evidence of engagement and experience, and we understand how we're going to investigate this locally. And then from there, we want to draft a research question, right? Why do we want to do that? First and foremost, a well-constructed research question, it will pull in the prior experiences of the student, right? Christy, myself, my team, right? Before we ever even consider the localization, but especially when we get to the research question, we're working through all of the different experiences the student has, and we're asking ourselves, would this research question pull this experience in? Now, you're never going to develop a research question that pulls in every single experience a student has, but we're trying to combine 3, 4 experiences, and we're making sure that it pulls those in. That's part 1. And then part 2, that research question is foreshadowing what the student is going to do in the future intellectually and what they're going to investigate at the university level, right? So the question, well constructed, it's pulling in the prior experiences, it's highlighting a local issue, and it's foreshadowing the student's intellectual investigation at the collegiate level. We spent a lot of time here, a lot of energy here, because the truth is the development of the question is the most important part. When I refer to the academic story, the academic narrative, the academic theme, 80% of the time, that academic story is the same as or very similar to the research question that we developed as kind of the capstone of the student's experience. That research question is significantly more important than the finding, right? The finding, whether, if it's economics, yeah, we should build it. No, we shouldn't build it. That's not relevant. I mean, it's relevant. We need to know it because we need to contextualize it and communicate it. But the finding doesn't matter. The question matters. And the question matters because it illustrates the student's ability to identify community issues, to investigate those issues, and to share the finding in a way that can positively impact the community. So let me share, again, my screen here for a moment with a different example. So this is the research question, right? So when we were finished localizing it, and then we were connecting the student to research mentors so they can begin research, this is part of the email that we sent. And what we said was, well, this is the question that's being asked by the mentor. They want to know, why are you interested in this area of research? right? And so we had a few thoughts before they get to the mentor, before they work with an expert in the space. My team wants to make sure that we are on the right path so that the mentor doesn't go off and start drafting research questions that don't further our narrative. There are lots of questions that are interesting to mentors and faculty members that are not going to be interesting to the admission staff, right? So we're making sure it's interesting to the admission staff. So you can see, right, from the article, this is the same student from the article that we originally found, we were asking questions like, how effective is the Ford government's plan to dismiss the environmental protection of the Greenbelt land in the Greater Toronto area? Will the planned 50,000 new homes significantly lessen GTA's housing shortage, right? And here's the articles that support that. Does More Homes Built Faster Act have sufficient provisions to alleviate the economic issues of housing scarcity in this area? Is the 10% minimum for affordable housing enough to accommodate the demand? What sources will local municipalities use to finance the amount of houses being built mandated by the bill? How did we come up with these questions? We read the articles, right? And we just asked ourselves, if I wanted to know more about whether this is a good idea, what questions would I ask? And we draft those, we send them over to the student. Now we're starting to get closer to the actual research question. These are dancing around the research question. Oftentimes, we'll send a variety of questions just like this, connect them to the mentor. The mentor will then refine that question to make sure that it's researchable by a 9th, 10th, or 11th grader in 8 to 12 weeks, depending on what program we're doing. And then the students will check with us to make sure that that research question is still supporting the direction and the localization that we checked on in advance, because that is so important. And I will tell you, many of you will not, many of you in this presentation today will do this by yourself. And it's important for you to know there are lots of research mentorship companies out there. And most of those research mentorship companies, what they're promoting is the research, right? And then maybe a letter of recommendation from the faculty member. And they're saying like, look, at the end, you're going to have a finding, right? And then the faculty member is going to recommend you. And I would tell you that that finding is irrelevant 99% of the time. And that letter of recommendation from a paid faculty member is most of the time something we don't even put in. We delete that. That's not a good idea. The magic of the research is the question. And you as the student, of course, if you're working with us, we're going to help you make sure you know that. But you as the student need to be able to communicate, why did you investigate this question? Why is it interesting to you? What was the motivation on a local level that led you to this? And what questions arose after you initially understood that issue? And how does that further your future intellectually? What are you going to study at college? And how does that impact what you want to do as it relates to your life post-college? Now, things will change, of course, right? You're going to change your mind, but you need to build a story now so that you can change your mind later, right? If you don't build a story now, you won't be able to change your mind because you won't be at the school you're looking for. So let me just, next, we'll go to the next slide here. Okay. So I wanted to give you an overview of the application process as it relates to the way we function and the way we work. And then I'm going to give you a few examples of the work that we do. So first, the software we use. If you decide to move forward with us, we use College Planner Pro. I consider it to be a nice software package that allows for me to kind of memorialize my process, all the steps that I think are really important for a student to follow, and to have my team help execute on those steps through the software of College Planner Pro. So that's the software we use. Second thing I wanted to note was the common application review. So one of the things that Christy does, my associate counselors do, is before we start the application, we go through a review of the process. What's the work we're about to do over the next couple months? What's the common application? How's the common application reviewed, etc. Today, I'm going to pull up a Common App from one of my students from last year and just kind of walk through the pieces of it just to show you the pieces and how this student did some certain aspects of the app. After that, after we have that first meeting where we introduce the student to how we're going to build their academic story in the application, then my team and I have a portfolio development meeting. So we go through, the student is generally not there, and we go through all the students' experiences, all the deliverables, the articles they wrote, the research abstracts, the videos they're in, whatever it might be, and we develop a portfolio. What is this student's academic narrative? What is this story? That's important for of course, me to know, right, and our consultants to know, but it's also really important for the student to know. You would hope that the students know their own story, but you'd be surprised how many don't. And the problem with the student not knowing their own story is that the recommenders then don't know, the guidance counselors don't know, those brag sheets that are being written by the parents, they're not informed by the academic narrative. So it's really quite important that everybody's on board and understands what the storyline is. And we do that, we make sure that's the case by developing these portfolios. The next part that I want to go over is benchmarking the college list. I developed a 17 metric algorithm that I use specifically. There are other people out there that have different algorithms. I've seen some good ones from other people on the IvyCompass team. This is based upon my experience, at 3 different universities, the Ivy Plus group, what I think moves the needle in college admissions. Of course, there were 17 metrics that made a ton of sense to me 10 days ago, right? You could argue now it's 16 metrics. Has race and ethnicity, has it been removed from the conversation? I don't know. We'll talk about that in more detail again as we move forward. But I'll show you a sample portfolio. I'll show you the benchmarking algorithm that I created. And then as it relates to the rest of our process, after we've developed the portfolio, the student story, we've benchmarked their list, right? Now we have to make sure that each of the institutions the student is going to apply to, that we know the prospective major, right? I said in the beginning, that's the most important part. But imagine for a moment that we decide your prospective major is, let's say broadly, public health, right? Not every university has public health. So if you were a public health prospective major, we would need to figure out how to take public health, that story, the elements of engagement that create a public health story. And if the university you're applying to doesn't have public health, what does that mean? Well, generally it's a distribution of other majors that very easily could develop a public health perspective, but you need to understand how to put those prospective majors together. So maybe, depending on the storyline that you created for public health, maybe that's a sociology, economic, biology story. Maybe it's anthropology, communications, and biology story. I don't know. But the point is that you need to understand what is your main prospective major, and that's usually built around your first choice school and the things that we've learned about you. But then at certain other institutions, that prospective major will not exist, and you will not be able to describe it the same way. And thus, my team and I go through every single institution the students that we're working on are applying to, and we say, okay, if the student is applying to, let's just say at Cornell, they're applying to industrial labor relations, right? That's a whole college at Cornell. At every other university, no other university has that, right? So how do you take industrial labor relations and apply with the same evidence to Columbia, to Penn, to Duke, to Hopkins? Well, it's actually not very difficult to do. Labor relations is about work, and everything is work, but you have to know how to do it, right? You have to understand what ILR is, you have to understand what the majors are at the other schools, and you have to be able to make that connection well. If you don't do it well, you will look like you don't understand what you can contribute, right? Because if you don't know where you're going, it's hard to illustrate what you're going to add. So it's really important that you understand the prospective majors at each institution. When we're done with the prospective majors, we start the brainstorm for our essays. The first thing we do is the personal statement. And the reason we do that is because I need to know what's in the personal statement before we move on to institutional specific essays. If we do with the personal statement and it's academic in nature, then we need to be aware of the academic content that was in that personal statement so we don't repeat it, right, in our supplemental essays. If there's nothing academic of nature in your personal statement, then we need to be intentional in making sure that that academic content shows up in supplemental essays. What you find is that many schools have options for supplemental essays. And you might think that one of the supplemental essays is easier. But what we might think, very often think, is that if you choose the easier one, it's not going to move the needle. That the reader, there's nothing you can say about, that specific question that's going to move the needle as compared to the question about show us your interest in the intellectual space that you're applying under. So we want to be very thoughtful about making sure that we know what's in the personal statement so that we can be strategic in the supplemental essays. Once we have our personal statement, brainstorm, then we will create an outline. So, most of the time the process is students go through a brainstorm modules, they meet with my team, they go through, they kind of clear out the bad ideas, and they're left with, 2 or 3 good ideas. And then, me, the student, my team, sit down and we develop an outline. This is what we think the story is going to look like. Here's the evolution of the character. Here's the, the movement of the story. And that's the baseline. The student goes off, they draft their first version of that personal statement, and then we kind of reevaluate where we stand. Sometimes it's comments back, sometimes it's like, oh, we're not on the same page here, we need to have a meeting. Sometimes the student's right on point, right? And we're able to move on and kind of create more depth in the essay because the first draft had the basics of what we needed. So again, each student's different in that regard, but getting personal statement done first is important. Once we're done with personal statement, or at least it doesn't have to be completed, but we have a general understanding of the direction, what my team and I then will do is create the supplemental essay research template. That means that for the school, your first choice school, what we do is we go through and we look at the school, we look at your experiences, and we create a template of the intersection, the synergies between what you've done and what the school's offering, so that you have an idea of how you would make those connections if the essay questions are requiring it, and many of them are requiring it. Then, of course, once the student gets that outline, they go off, they do their first round of their draft, and they send it to us, and then we go through that same process of review and edits for the supplemental essay. And then the last bullet point you can see there is the activity list, honors list, where usually I would say that's the last thing or close to the last thing we do, because we want to see what are the things that in this activity list that are substantive, right? Substantive meaning that these things are showing up in the personal statement or supplemental essay, and we want to understand what experiences are contextual, right? We're not actually writing about these things that are supplemental essays, but showing up in the activity list, that's contextual. And we have to ask ourselves, if it's only supplying context, what's the best way to do it? Saying you show up to Model UN meetings on Tuesdays, right? That's not going to move the needle. Contextually, within the context of the intellectual story we're building, what might we say about Model UN that would move the needle? Sometimes we come to the conclusion that there's nothing that could be said about this experience that could move the needle. And then we challenge ourselves to add some personality, right? Maybe there's humor that's going to go in there. Maybe there's a quip. I don't know, right? But it's intentionality in each one of the activities to understand, why did we put it here? Why did we order it here? And is it substantive or contextual? And if it's contextual, how are we using it? Okay, so let me give you just a few examples here. I'll click on. Okay, so the first here doc that we're going to review is a Common app. This young lady was a student of mine from last year, or this past year. She's not in school yet, but she was admitted to Harvard. I want to share just a few things. Page 1 here that you can see, make it a little bit bigger, is demographic information. There's nothing really to be said here. I would suggest that you fill it out honestly and truthfully. The only thing I would note is that sometimes this contact details here, colleges are sometimes calling you. Like if you get waitlisted, right, they're literally going to call you. And so just make sure that the phone numbers that are listed here are phone numbers that actually get answered by somebody. Page 2 is about whether you have a Common App fee waiver. Most of you probably will not. And so it'll just say no there. The next page is family information, right? So again, I would say you should fill this out honestly. There's no real strategy behind this. I get questions about whether they should, whether students should lie about their parents' professions and stuff. 99% of the time, no. Like lying in general in this app is not a good idea. The only time we think about whether or not we would not note a parent's occupation would be if for some reason, a substantive experience of the student was somehow garnered through the parent's occupation. Then of course we don't want that because it doesn't look overly genuine. And so we think through whether or not we want to list the occupation. But generally, demographic, parent information, nothing overly important to note here. It is important, I guess, to say that it asks for your educational information for parents. There's nothing to change strategically. Just recognize that, if you have a strong educational background, you went to a strong undergraduate school, you have a master's degree or a PhD or otherwise, in some ways that does raise the bar of expectation for the reader. They say, oh yeah, like parents have 2 PhDs, I have higher expectation. If the parents did not go to college at all, they're first generation. And of course, there's lots of different ways to be successful. You don't need to go to college to do so. So I have, parents and families that I work with whose parents did not go to college. That will have an impact. That's called a first generation college student. And that, that will have an impact. You would just put no college here, and that usually is automatically picked up by the schools that you're applying to. The next is about the student's education. And again, this is, as a reader, I would say 99% of the time, the readers are barely even glancing at this page because this is self-reported academic information. As you can imagine, the readers aren't taking the student's word for it, right, on their grades and their classes. They're checking the transcript, they're looking at all that stuff. So, the questions I generally get here are, what GPA should I know? I would say note whatever the highest GPA is that you want to note. I don't care if it's weighted, unweighted, whatever the highest version of something that you believe is accurate, put it down. Current courses, I will note here that it's important to understand that when you apply to college, right, the senior year grades, most of the time, especially for early decision, they don't exist, right? There are no grades at that point. So all they really have for senior year oftentimes is the decisions you make about what you take. So oftentimes the course schedule for senior year is the most important part of your senior year. And the opposite of, like, I feel bad for students that want to have a nice, easy senior year after really working hard, right? 9th through 11th. But the truth is that's not a good strategy. A better strategy would be take the most rigorous course load you possibly could. And, maybe you were a straight A student before, and now you're going to get a B or 2. Okay, I'd rather that than you lower the rigor and then get straight A's, because the lower rigor will impact your actual decision. If you get mostly A's and you get a B or 2, or maybe even a C in your senior year, after the decision's already been made, that will have very little impact. So important that you have a strong senior year curriculum. And then you can see the honors list. I will tell you that, most of these readers have no clue what they're looking at when they read these honors lists. Adelphi Quill Awards, 2-time best news story, best reporter on Long Island. I work with this young lady. I know her. I don't know, and I know what that award, I know when she applied for it. I still don't really know the context, the depth of how many people there were and how impressive it is. And the readers definitely do not know that. And so you can see here, Smith College High School Poetry Prize finalist, 4 out of 200. We add this 4 out of 200 to contextualize it for the readers so they understand, like, oh yeah, okay, there was a decent number of people in this, and this student did relatively well. If you don't contextualize it, nobody really knows. Most of the readers do not really know what the Nancy Thorpe Poetry Contest is. And I will tell you, if you read the opinion from the Supreme Court case, the admissions officers look very bad, and you find what I'm telling you is true. Most of these readers, they're not trained well enough to know everything. And so you have to provide the relevant information, and what you say and the way you say it is what they're going to think, right? It's not like they have this big background of information that you don't know about. Future plans, this is super important. You'd be amazed at how many students, they will build an entire application. It's built around X, let's just say for argument's sake, it's built around housing inequity, right? And then for future plans, it says physician. That is a death blow. That future plans thing is irrelevant. By the way, it's a Common App that's just asking that question. Doesn't matter what you put down. But if you put something down that's fundamentally different than what the rest of your app says, right? That's a pause moment for the reader. That's a red flag. That's a definite wait list, even for an academically strong student that fits the academic credentials that they're looking for. Then you have the testing section. You can see here, the reason this is deleted is that this was a 4, and this wasn't the finalized Common App that we actually submitted. When we actually decided to submit, we decided not to put that 4 down. And the reason we did that is we just want to keep a nice, strong 5 sequence. It gives the reader a certain feel. We thought that the 4, detracted from that, so we just deleted it. Then we have the activity list. So, this is probably the most important part of the Common App itself, because this is the substance of the way you spent your time and energy. The order of this list is important, the content of the list is important, and how it either supports or detracts the essays you've written is quite important. What you find here is that you don't have to read this, right? Like editor-in-chief of literary magazine, editor-in-chief of school newspaper, creative writing director, poetry mentor. Like, you don't need to know anything about this young lady to know she's a writer, right? And that's the goal there. Okay. Next, we get to the personal statement. You can see it's all blacked out. The reason I have this in here is I just want you to note that the personal statement is literally in the Common App, right? So this Common App is a PDF file, right? That the readers are going to pull up, and that's where it exists. And of course, they're going to read it at every single school because it exists in the Common App. I would just note here, she had a unique structure. She just, she's a writer by nature, and she wanted to have a unique structure to her personal statement. So she did that. And also the spacing of the essay. I know this sounds silly, but it matters. Like this, the readability, these people are reading many of them, and you want good spacing and readability of your essays. Okay, this is, in my opinion, the most important aspect of the Common App that we can impact, and that's the additional information section. We had a bunch of students last year that we talked about this additional information section a lot. And what happened was we got kind of some panicked emails from students when they sat down to the Common App. They emailed me and they said, John, just so you know, there is no additional information section. Like they got rid of it this year. I actually had a bit of panic when I heard that because I hadn't looked at it quite yet when the first student emailed me. And I said, wait a second, how's that even possible? But when we pulled it up, they hadn't gotten rid of it. It's a drop down, right? You have to click that you have additional information for it to appear. And if you do click on that, you will find that there are 650 additional words that you have to share your story. And you can see this young lady decided that she was going to put all of her published works down. Here's her poetry and fiction section. Here's her journalism section. Then she decided that there was something she wanted to add from her activity list here, a link to a past issue. She felt like there were some awards that were important that she wanted to add. Like, for example, AP Scholar Award is pretty much irrelevant. Like, we know about the APs just from looking at your curriculum. And so, like, I wouldn't want to put that on the honors list unless it was the only thing we had. If it was the only thing we had, sure, great, let's put it down. But that wasn't the only thing we had, so it didn't show up there. That can show up in your additional information section. And then you can see she had some additional extracurriculars that she wanted to add. Kenyon Writers Workshop, Canon Futures Authors Workshop, Ellipsis Writing. These are my notes at the bottom. You can see I said, note the extras are academically relevant, right? If this young lady applied as a journalism student, creative writing student, this all makes sense, right? Nobody has to guess as to why she went to those workshops. If those workshops were for computer science and this was a journalism app, like we would not put that down, right? On the additional information section or anywhere else for that matter. So it has to be relevant. Education progression, you will see this is just whether or not there's been a change. If you took a year off or gap year or something, that will show up. So if you have any unique circumstances, that is definitely a pause moment for readers, important to know about. And then this is, I said that she is going to Harvard. This was for Williams. You can see the supplement, right? So this was the Williams questions are generally connected into that PDF for the Common App. So now these are the questions that Williams is asking. And oftentimes when we think about the questions, we're thinking about the essays, but it's not just the essays. This one asked, how are you applying? Did you apply for financial aid? Do you have a fee waiver? Do you want me to consider the SATs because they were optional at the time? Other schools like NYU or Cornell, they'll ask you, do you want to start? Are you willing to start in the spring semester instead of fall? Do you want to start on on the Abu Dhabi campus instead of the main campus? So lots of different schools have lots of different questions, and it is important you understand those questions because especially the ones about when you start and what campuses you start on, they have significant impact on admissions decisions. Okay, and then the next page is, this is the supplemental questions asked by Williams specifically. They want to know what are your academic interests, right? They want to know whether or not you've previously applied. They want to know whether your family has any connections, and that's the end of the Common App. So this is your Common App. And, I think it's important to understand it so that you can prepare for it. So you can understand how the pieces of your experiences will fit into the Common App later. Okay. Quickly now, student portfolio. This is an example of when we're just about to start the app, when we're trying to understand who the student is, what do we create? So you can see this is Sammy Sample from Rye Neck High School. We have the academic information, 1510, GPA, the classes the student's taking. You can see this is the class I was referring to here. AP Calc ended with a B in the junior year. That gave me concern about cognitive science and STEM areas as related to highly selective schools. That's why we need to make a change in the last moment. The most important part here is you can see the academic theme, right? So what did we do? We draft this so we understand how to position the student. So what we said about this student was leveraging a foundation in behavioral economics, because that's what the student did to begin with. And then we note here how we're going to use it, the active versus passive attention from decision-making research experience, like that's the thing I'm talking about, and deep engagement in public communication research, that's the public service announcement research the student did. Sammy uniquely investigates the interplay between societal institutions and individual well-being. His research, debate experience, and community-focused actions exemplify his understandings of the complex, multifaceted nature of communications. Sammy's specific interest in how to make public service announcements more memorable illustrates that he is well prepared to contribute innovative, interdisciplinary insights related to historical, contemporary, and cultural communication dynamics. Now, we would never write that for an essay, right? This is an overview of the student, and that's so that when Christy sits down, when I sit down to look at a supplemental essay, that I can immediately ground myself in understanding what we're trying to accomplish and ask myself, is that supplemental essay or is that personal statement accomplishing the academic narrative that we're trying to meet? Sometimes the student, there's secondary themes. This student had one, but not all students have a secondary theme. Okay, and then I wanted to show you quickly the benchmarking algorithm. The 17 metrics that are used here to benchmark are as follows. Let me make this just a little bit larger. You can see the 17 metrics here. In green, the top three, those are weighted the heaviest in the algorithm: grades, standardized test, and rigor. Those are your quantitative bar of entry points of data. And then the middle weights are app type. Did you apply REA, ED, ED2, RD, whatever it is that has a significant impact on your admissibility? The engagement rating, how engaged are you in the space that you say you're academically interested in? Do we have any objective achievement for the honors list? Are there partial qualities or obstacles you overcome that are gonna shine through on the app? What is your prospective major? As I've said from the beginning, like whether just that choice, the name of it will have a monster impact on your admissibility. What is your ethnicity? That's the 17 that could come to 16. That used to be a big part of the review process. I think it's, we'll talk in more detail maybe through the Q&A. I think it's still to be determined how impactful that will be. Of course, they're going to have to meet the guidelines that the court set, but how they do it will be questionable. Citizenship, I think, still will play a very significant role. International students definitely is more competitive for them. There's no question about that. The high school you go to, do you go to a feeder school, like a well-known feeder school that many of the colleges and universities know? Or, is this a high school that maybe never sent a student to X college or university? That has an impact. And then we have these things called hooks. Do you have a sibling that attended this school? Do you have legacy at that institution, your parents or grandparents? Are you a VIP? Did your parents donate money to the school? Are you first generation? Maybe your parents didn't go to college and you'd be a first generation college student. That can be a hook at schools. Are you a female in a underrepresented STEM area? So, biology, for example, is not underrepresented by females, but, physics and engineering are. Or do you add some level of geographic diversity? Now, there are some schools out there that have different hooks, but these are the most common hooks that you will see. And what I do is I grade our students across these 17 metrics. You'll see the first thing I do is, I'll give you an example based on grades and class rank. So Kyle R here, right? Kyle R scored a 2 in student grades and class rank. What does a 2 actually mean? Well, you can see down here, I have this chart and I ask myself, based upon the student's class rank, and I know a lot of schools don't have class rank, but we use the profile and such to figure out as close as we can. Based on the student's class rank, is the student below the top 50%? Are they in the top 50%? Are they in the top 25%? Are they in the top 10%? Are they in the top 3%? You can see here, right, that this is just an example. The student gets a 2. Now, the second question we have to ask ourselves is, well, that's for the student. Now, the student wants to apply to Brown. The student wants to apply to Penn. The student wants to apply to Cornell. If I said the student was in the top 50%, but not the top 25%, right, they get a 2. Now I have to ask myself at each individual school, at Brown, what does being in the top 50% mean? So here's the review. I ask myself, at Brown, if you're in the top 50% of your class, is that significantly more competitive than an applicant at this school? Is it more competitive? Is it similar? Is it less competitive? Or is it not competitive? And at the end of this analysis, the students will get 2 scores. One is your individual score. That score will follow this range and it will show you if you score a 105, that I think your target admit range based on my algorithm is somewhere between 7.5% and 15%, which would inform like a Cornell level school, right? That's score number one? What is your individual score, and how does that impact the acceptance rate that you should be focused on for a target level school? And then the second score you get will be a school specific score. So at Cornell, right, what is your score? And that will be connected to the school fit score. So if you score a 79 at Cornell, that means that you're below 80 and you're not competitive. And that means that it used to say 0%, like you have a 0% chance of getting in, but then one of my students got in to a school I said they had no chance of getting into. So I had to change it to 1%. But nonetheless, the point is simply that, you're not competitive academically, really, statistically, based upon this review, and you should adjust accordingly. If you score between 80 and 84, I consider it to be a significant reach, about 10% chance. Between 84 and 92, a reasonable reach, 25%. 92 and 103, that's a target school, generally somewhere between 50 and 60%. And then above a 103 is a safe school. I say above 70%. It's hard to call any selective school. Like let's just say you score a 105 at NYU. Can we say that you have a 90% chance of getting into NYU? No school with an admit rate of less than 20%. Is there ever a 95% chance of students getting into it in regular decision, right? So we say 70%, but generally we feel pretty good if these students are going to get into those level schools. So that's the benchmarking algorithm. It's part science, part art. I do this mostly for students and families to understand where they are. We still will make some adjustments to the algorithm based upon, intricacies that really can't be collected through an algorithm. Okay. I hope you found the content, of this conversation helpful so far. I know it's a lot to digest. There's so much more to share. I could go on and on probably for hours about this. But before we jump into Q&A, I just want to briefly note the IvyCompass partnership. One of the things that I think is super important is that I can communicate my ideas effectively to students and parents. Sometimes for parents, when English is a second language, they struggle with understanding my strategy. And sometimes the students aren't communicating that strategy. And so there's this disconnect and the families feel lost. IvyCompass fills that gap really nicely in a way that I cannot do, and quite honestly, just don't have time to do. Also, even if the student family does speak English and understands what's going on, the IvyCompass teams provide a significantly more robust and enhanced engagement update. I do my updates through the software that I showed you. All of the meeting notes will be emailed, but I always believe that that's sufficient, right? Like read through it and you will see what I said. IvyCompass team will make sure that if there's some disconnect while reading it, that they can provide context for it. And then the final part, and probably the most important part, is that IvyCompass provides resources that I just don't have. Academic competition support, community engagement support, some research mentors, which I have found incredibly helpful to facilitate the engagement experiences of our students. Okay, that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I know I talk a lot and I talk fast. Looking forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very, very much. Does Christy wanted to say a couple words? Go ahead, you can unmute yourself because you are also a very important aspect of that entire coaching process.
Yeah, so we usually describe our relationship as John develops the strategy for the overall application, and the associate counselors are in charge of implementing that strategy. So what that means is I would be emailing students and parents, reminding students of deadlines, things from research mentor connections to overseeing elements of the Common application, such as the activities list. I would also be a writing coach. And that means that I would help make sure that John's strategy for the application theme or narrative would come through in all of the essays, whether they are the personal statement or college essay or the school-specific supplemental essays. So we play a very hands-on, face-to-face role with students, especially in the senior year.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Thank you, Christy.
Thank you.
Christy is one of a great team member. And I will tell you that many of my clients ask me questions about what is it like functioning with a team, and what I will tell them is that my level of confidence that your students can execute is a lot higher when I have a whole team of people who know how to execute, right? And that's what Christy and her team bring to this.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you, John. I also want to emphasize, because many times when we have that initial front end conversation with the parents, many times parents are focused so much attention on who is my social consultant, are they good enough, and I always tell them, your main goal really to focus on choosing the lead consultant. I think the company is not important, IvyCompass is not important, but the lead consultant is important. You are not working with, I think when you choose that person, coach your student, you need to find that right person, know what they're doing, providing the seriousness of responsibility, care about your student. I see many cases, John is one of those person so rare to find in the market. Some people know what they're doing, have a good background, but they don't care. They don't care enough. So you don't find them. Sometimes email is not responding for a week. We have to chase them to responding the email. And sometimes parents coming to us and, saying, we want somebody to hire that person, have a Harvard background, because Harvard background will be helping my kids going to Harvard. No, you missed the point. They know enough about top 20 school, top 30 school. They know so much about school, more than you ever can imagine. So John understanding all top school, MIT, Stanford, and Duke, he doesn't have to be working in that college or university able to help your kids going to that school. The reason is because they are all looking for the same pool of a student. If your portfolio is strong enough fitting for Harvard, then you pretty much will be fighting by Stanford. Could be, depends on that prospective major obviously you're applying for. So I want to emphasize that. Also, don't make that decision too complicated. Don't think, I choose John, then I have to, think about who is my social consultant. Trust me, John is so particular to whoever that person is supporting him. If they are not qualified in writing, they all have to go through a very rigorous process of testing their writing skill and also ability of talking to students. If they're not qualified, then John is handicapped. Not able to execute what he wants the student to be and reach to that goal. So to me, they're all good. They're all very good. Obviously, personality, also chemistry sometimes plays a role, just like when you choose the lead consultant. John is perfect, but perfect coach does not mean able to coach the perfect student, meaning you have to find right chemistry. Sometimes John is not fitting for everyone, okay? Sometimes John's personality, John's coaching style doesn't fit, just like my personality doesn't fit. Some people like me, some people hate me. Some parents cannot talk to Sophia. Then they talk to Allison, then Allison is better fit. So that's why we are a team. We are a team to help each student. One thing I can promise you is our team only working very hard, care about each person comes in. Like I said, I don't want my company, I don't want IvyCompass to be a big. When you're too big, you're not able to pay attention to every student. I only wanted to have a limited student. So not every student coming to us, we are hungry for your business. We're not. If you cannot understanding, knowing the value we're providing, then you're not our client. Then you're not our, the people we're serving better. Does not mean you're bad. Just, we are not able to serve you better. So I wish you, all the best. Okay, before going to the question session, I know there's a lot of questions we're not able to answer. There's always a lot of questions for John. But I want everyone to see the screen I'm sharing. On the left-hand side is the barcode you can scan. If you think, you can just see, every time when I listen to John's presentation, I always think, I even have people text message me. They're not able to understand 100% what I'm saying. I work at this industry for 10 years. I'm not understanding every single thing you talk about. That's right. You don't understanding. That's right. That's why the value coming from. That's why you're paying somebody professional to do this job for you. If you can understanding everything, then you don't have to pay someone, right? Also, just think about, sometimes parents also say their kids doing everything by yourself. Just think about the information you listening here. If you don't understand as adults, can a high school student have that capacity of social experience to understanding everything what they're looking for? So the right-hand barcode, scan it. If you scan it, you're recording that barcode and also fill that sample form only a couple minutes. You will have a free opportunity to talk to John to at least have a one-on-one conversation. Within that half hour, within that 45 minutes, at least you can have information tailored to your kids. Give it a chance to see if he's the best fit for your kid, okay, for your high school student. So the left-hand barcode is inquiry, free inquiry meeting, one-on-one meeting to schedule. So me and Allison will follow up after you fill that form. Right-hand side barcode is for someone interested to finding out more information from IvyCompass. Every single month we have free presentation like this. We have someone coming to share their perspective, how they're coaching the high school to application business or that goal. So right-hand side barcode is for you to scan so you can be in our WeChat group. So we'll continue providing that information to you. Okay, so after that, then let me go through the chat box. There's lots of information. I think one of the information jump onto me is I wanted to kind of answer for now. A lot of people are still confused about ACT score. Is that important? Can you share that information to tell all? Is ACT or ACT still important to take?
Yeah, I think it's definitely the landscape has changed post-COVID. And we've, pre-COVID, there were test optional schools out there. They were basically fake test optional, like University of Chicago was test optional. They took 90% of the enrolled students had submitted test scores, and it was really designed only for underrepresented minority students. Then the pandemic hit, and everyone was forced to consider whether they had to take apps without SATs because kids couldn't take these SATs. And so you get a year or two of data from schools about whether that worked. And I think what we found was that there were differing opinions. MIT was optional, and their faculty very much made it clear, no more, we need the SAT, bring it back. University of California system said, we're done with the SAT, we'll never use it again. And then you find kind of varying degrees in between. I would suggest to all my clients that they should take an SAT or an ACT practice test. We should evaluate which one's the best direction. You should then take the actual test of SAT or ACT. And if you don't score where you need to be, and you don't feel like there's any additional prep option to do better, then we take a long, hard look at the blind or optional list. But I think you should start with, let's try to prepare for a standardized test and see if we can be successful there first.
Excellent. Okay, great. Okay, next question coming from Matif Zhang. His question is, how do you compare summer research programs and working with the college researchers? Would you say they are the same since the end product would be similar, or would you say summer research programs are better since they require an application?
Yeah, good question. I think my perspective about research as relates to doing the research itself, not like whether I submit my research to competition later on, right? But like doing the research, should I go to a summer program, or if I did it on an individualized side? I would say it's completely irrelevant. Like, I don't care when my students say, hey, I'm doing research through my APX class, and is that sufficient? My questions are always as follows. Number one, how much flexibility do you have in the question? That's the most important part. Number two, how much support are you going to get from an actual expert that can move you to the end and have a finding? If the answer is you have as much flexibility as you need and you have an expert to support you, I don't think it matters. Anything else matters. But if you don't have those two things, then you need to be thoughtful about getting them, because the question itself is the most important part.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, John. Okay, next question, also very related to what's happening now, from a Jenny Zhang. Since I am a Chinese, which of the following aspects do you suggest? I put Asian because that question Christine also asked me, so I wanted to put out and so you can answer to a lot of people. Either I put as Asian in demographic, or Chinese in demographics, or Mandarin in language. Will you think including this aspect will potentially working against us, especially since we're not sure how college will change according to the recent affirmative action case?
Could you just read the beginning of that question again? The very beginning, what were they going to do different?
Since our audience is Chinese, right? So they're very concerned about which following aspect do you suggest to put down? Either put down Asian in demographic, that location, or Chinese in demographic location, or Mandarin in language. to really tell them what's background they are, based on the reason that affirmative action, case that will be hurting for the Chinese or Asian. How would you recommending us to put down?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was reading through the case notes the other night, and what was noted as a specific example was for Asian students that the readers at Harvard, I believe it's for Harvard, I don't think it was UNC, I think it was Harvard, didn't know the difference between South Asian and East Asian. That was like noted in the case. And so I guess what I would say to your question is, like, the truth is 95% of the readers, whether you put Chinese, Asian, Indian, like, it's really irrelevant, because they aren't, as the case noted, these readers are not actually trained well enough to understand the differences, most of them. So Asian will be kind of seen, at least historically, Asian was seen as Asian. I would put down whatever you feel most comfortable with, and it wouldn't really have any impact, at least before, whether it was Chinese or Asian or otherwise. Now, it's unclear 100%. We could talk in more detail about what it's going to look like, but I would say the strategy doesn't change now with the court ruling. I would put down answer appropriately, although I think you're going to see soon that they're going to have to make changes to all these apps. Like, they're not going to be able to ask these questions the same way. And so I think you're going to probably see a change shortly.
Thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to apologize ahead of time. There's so many questions. I'm not able to have enough time for John to answer all the questions. So I'm going to just choose what I think maybe have a bigger representation. So John or Christy can answer those questions. Okay, next question from Heidi Pan. Is it risky to position yourself as a interdisciplinary student if you are going into a subject that is interdisciplinary, like climate work?
Like what?
Climate work.
Climate work. Got it. Okay. Interdisciplinary is a good thing, right? Like, most complex problems are interdisciplinary in nature, as noted, like climate change. And so colleges and universities, that's like a buzzword, interdisciplinary learning is important. The problem is that the reader, the student that is, has to understand how to take disparate pieces of academia and find the synergies that are interdisciplinary in nature. So I think with climate work, like, if you see the synergies between policy and, environmental science and whatever areas you're talking about, that would be good. I guess, the biggest concern you have there is that the student doesn't create a foothold in one area, right? But if you do it well, it's not a problem to have interdisciplinary multiple areas. They just need to all be working together, and it needs to be done well. But if you don't do it well, you can look like there's a lack of substance because you're talking about a lot of different areas without putting it together the right way.
Okay, thank you. Next question from Kay Gao. Does your prospective major have to be in the same department as your declared actual major?
Your prospective major has to be in the same college.
Department.
Right?
Department.
Right, but not department. That's so the answer is no, because your prospective major is the department, right? For the most part. So, not always, but like my prospective major is communications. What's the department? Communications. The communications, the prospective major has to exist in the college type you applied to. So if I applied, my prospective major is mechanical engineering, and I applied the arts and sciences college, then I'm not going to be able to do mechanical engineering because that major does not exist in the arts and sciences college. So you need to make sure your prospective major and your, in theory, your actual major both exist in the same college type.
Okay. Yeah, that question always very confused for a lot of people. So we can repeating that for different kind of, time.
Yeah.
That
so just as a
prospective major
reminder,
and your major.
the three college types, whatever university, Columbia, Cornell, Penn, doesn't matter, three college types that are main: business, engineering, arts and sciences. The prospective major that you put on your app and the actual major, the one that you're going to declare, those two things both must exist in the college type you chose: arts and sciences, business, or engineering. We go through that and make sure 100% that that's the case, if students are doing that.
Okay. See, this a lot of questions around this area. Another one pop up say, can you pick undecided major during applications so to avoid competition such as computer science?
Yeah, so there are two types of undecided students, and I would say 90% fall into category one. Category one is let's assume for the moment the student has good grades, good standardized tests, good rigor, but they're category 1 undecided, meaning like they've dabbled, right? I'm in the physics club. I dabbled in Model UN. I dabbled in debate. My mom and dad sent me to a bunch of summer programs. I did research, but the dabbling basically means that they haven't investigated in enough depth to understand what they're interested in. That's 90% of the undecideds. The remaining 10% of the undecideds are the very desirable type, the type that say, I had this experience related to Western literature research, and I have this experience related to public health. And I see an intersection between the way Western literature describes suffering and public health methods. That intersection might mean that you're undecided, right? Because maybe you don't know exactly how you're going to put it together, or you haven't decided what the main major is or what the minor is. But that, if you understand the connection, it doesn't, that is a good undecided type of application. But most students don't have multiple areas that they have in-depth engagement in, and that they could make a case in theory for both of them. If they can do that, that's a good undecided app, but that most students don't fall into that category.
Thank you, John. The next question is also often asked us, is well-rounded a good character to have? Just well-rounded.
Well, in life, I think yes. In the college admissions process, I would say generally no. And again, like well-rounded, it depends on how it's actually executed on the app. If you do a very good job with all these well-rounded things, maybe it lands. But most of the time, being well-rounded means that the student, especially if they're doing it by themselves, doesn't know how much energy or space as it relates to the essays to spend on all these different things. And because they don't have a strategy behind it, that well-rounded looks like there's a lack of substance as compared to the student who dove into 1 or 2 areas and that's all they talked about. The colleges, if you go there and ask them, do you want well-rounded students? Of course, they're going to say yes, because everyone wants well-rounded people. But the application itself, the dynamic of the app, it's limited in nature, right? So it's not like you have unlimited amounts of time to write whatever you want. And thus, well-rounded students most of the time don't show well on the app as compared to focused students.
Thank you. Okay, the next question coming from a student named Audrey. I am not very strong. I'm not very strong in math. Got a B in pre-calculus in sophomore year. Would you recommend me to take AP Calculus BC, most rigorous offered in my school, or AP Calculus AB in my junior year?
So my first question would be, what's the prospective major? It really depends on what that prospective major is. If the prospective major is in a STEM area, or God forbid math, then yeah, you have to take the most rigorous class and hope that you do quite well. And you want to update the reader with the grades as soon as they become available. If it's clearly outside of the STEM area, then I would say take AB and get the better grade.
Okay, thank you. John, would a student having physics interest and AI be compatible for application?
Physics and AI?
Physics interest.
Sorry,
AI.
So is the physics compatible with, I'm sorry, ask that
one more time. Yeah. Would a student having a physics interest, meaning they're interested in the physics, so AI background, is that compatible for application?
I'm very hesitant to use anything related to AI in any application that's for any Asian male student in general, just because the dynamic of computer science is so competitive, and the reader immediately has a lens and a perspective that the student has to blow them away in order to move the needle. So I would suggest that, I'd have to know more about the student. If the AI component to the research is really important, we think about how it fits in. But I would lean towards just keeping it more oriented towards physics than AI oriented.
Right.
Machine learning and AI, as you can all imagine, is a super hot topic amongst many demographic groups of students, specifically Asian male students a lot. And I think it's fascinating and awesome, and I'm intrigued by it, but there's just overkill of it with the readers. And most of the readers are female, young, liberal, they're not technologists. The machine learning AI story just doesn't land for most of them.
Yeah. That repeats many times. Okay, next one for Sandra, John. If the student is unsure about which major to apply, would applying double major be harder What are your thoughts?
Remember, so we get back to that beginning conversation of like prospective major versus actual major. And so like, if you have no idea what you want to do like, at all, then I would suggest like what we do is we identify your prospective major, and maybe it's kind of close to something you're minorly interested in, or maybe it's like you're just not. I've had students who just say, I'm just interested in there's nothing I'm interested in, John. I don't care. My parents made me sign up and you choose, and then we choose, like we choose an area. How do we choose? We don't just willy-nilly choose, right? We think through like, well, what's happening in their community? What would make a good story? We check with the student and get a sense of like, do they have any interest in it? And then we make a decision. And once we make a decision, that becomes the storyline. I would suggest if you don't have a strong opinion that you would only pick one storyline, meaning one prospective major, you wouldn't want to add a second, because if you add a second, you need evidence for it, right? So that means that you need to engage in that space as well, which would take, in theory, double the time.
Okay, thanks. Next one coming from Marilyn Lee is a business question. Should I apply economic or business school if acceptance rate is around the same and the kids does not have much of preference? Will you suggest if he has more entrepreneurship experience than academic, or just apply for business school?
This is a very, a lot of these topics are very complex if you don't really 100% understand how universities are structured. But basically, the answer to your question, and this is, talk about college structure again, right? You have the business school, you have the arts and sciences school. Economics as a major exists at 95% of the universities in both of them, right? So if you look at Penn, Wharton, the only degree everybody gets is economics. The areas like finance and marketing, those are concentrations for the undergrads. So everyone's getting an economics major at Wharton. And then if you look at Penn, arts and sciences, they have a major, economics. So what's the difference? Like part one is understanding the difference. Most students have no idea what the difference is. And I would say most teachers and guidance counselors also have no clue the difference between the economics major in arts and sciences and what's happening in business. Now, what I would say, first of all, is that if you apply arts and sciences, right? So I'm arts and sciences economics, you cannot have business-oriented content on that app, right? You can't have, I'm in the finance club, I'm in the marketing club. That's business. It's only business. Finance doesn't exist in arts and sciences. Marketing doesn't exist in arts and sciences. Accounting doesn't exist in arts and sciences. That's all business. If you have any of that content on your experience and your activity list, and you apply to arts and sciences econ, you will not get in. Now, the fact that they're so focused on that to make sure that they're not getting business students applying to arts and sciences colleges gives, in my opinion, as related to this space, us a huge strategic advantage, because 50% or more of the students who apply arts and sciences econ are immediately eliminated because they have these things on their activity list: finance, marketing, accounting, etc. And so I always think that that's like a magic pathway, that if people understand what economics is and they know what engagement experiences support economics and which ones do not, that they could build a arts and sciences econ app and be very successful at a lot of schools that they might not have been successful in any other area. Like econ is a unique space that people don't really understand. Now, so we use that a lot. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't think that I think the business school is inaccessible. I actually think that if you look at Cornell as an example, Cornell had one of, amongst all the colleges, the business school had the lowest admit rate when I was there. Why was that? It was just because it was small, literally physically, like they had no seats. If you look at the academic quality, they were weaker than the engineering and arts and sciences significantly. But people perceived that to mean that that's the toughest school to get into. And that really wasn't true. And I would say, I had a similar experience when I was at Lehigh, when we were trying to recruit high-level business students, that there are not nearly as many. Like if you said, hey, you know what, show me all the kids in the country who have a 1550 SAT score or higher who want business, versus show me all the students in the country who have a 1550 or higher who want CS or pre-med. There'll be way more CS and pre-med. So I think that business is not overly competitive, at least not as competitive as the admit rates make it seem. And it is a viable pathway to go business. You just need to have I like to start with the Wharton concentrations and use those as my position description, my departmental description, and build around them. But you have to pick one that is flexible enough that you could apply to Wharton. For example, like they have public policy and governance economics and arts and sciences econ. Like that would work. That story would work for both ways, but certain stories will not work for both ways. So the short answer to the question is, it depends on the student as to which pathway is the most strategic. It depends on gender, ethnicity, academic experiences, but both are viable pathways if you understand what you're trying to do.
And you need to work with John, then that way you have clear paths to working.
Yeah, I mean, I would just, I think everyone hopefully who's listening recognizes, like, I'm not trying to hold back information here. You know, my perspective is simply, I'll give you all the information. Most people will either not understand it and want to hire us, or understand it and think we can do it better. So I'm not trying to hold back. The truth is, it's a very complex conversation as to whether you go business or arts and sciences econ. But if I'm forced to choose, I generally choose arts and sciences econ just because I know so much about that pathway that nobody else does.
Yes, I watched that. I witnessed that many, many times. So you need to find a professional person to do professional things. This is so deep. Let me tell you, this is so deep. It's not so simple. So you need to find the right person. So next question is also related to that is, there's a parents asking you, since you're so good, how many students do you usually take in 1 year?
Yeah, so, you know, I've, when I left Cornell and I started consulting, obviously I was doing this on my own, and I very quickly did max out on the total number of students that I was working with. That number of students that I was working with by myself in an individual capacity, the first year I did, when I maxed out, was 20. The second year I did it at 25. And that was fine. And then we were very successful. The model that I've moved to is to move away from these. I have very few exclusive packages where I'm just sitting there with these students all the time now. The model that I've built is, you know, I've identified very specific touch points in the 9th through 11th grade sequence and in the 12th grade sequence that I think I need to provide my insight for me to feel comfortable, right? Like, about how we're going to build this story. So that's what this has been to design a structure whereby my team is prepared to execute on my strategic initiatives. And under that structure, what I say is that my team, right? I wouldn't want any of my associate consultants to be managing more than 10 students in an academic year. They're doing the execution, I'm doing the strategy behind, and the strategy is like in the moment. That's not like sitting there, you know, at 3 o'clock in the morning trying to figure out a story. That you are definitely limited in how many students you can take in that regard. But in a strategic structure with a really well-trained team, you know, I have a different perspective on what my role is in that piece.
Okay. Can you provide some schools that are related to speaking easier to transfer to CS computer after you get in, and from another less competitive major? That's a really big question.
Well, there's basically 2 types of universities out there as it relates to the way they've structured their arts and sciences colleges. You know, most of the universities like Cornell, Penn, Hopkins, Duke, Columbia, arts and sciences is all encompassing. So if you apply as a history major and you look at the majors in that college, you know, yeah, they have history, but they also have computer science, they have math, they have physics. So in that structure, right, if I apply to College of Arts and Sciences, Cornell, as a history major, can I declare computer science? Yes, because computer science is a major in the College of Arts and Sciences. Some of the schools, though, have moved the certain areas outside, or they actually kind of divided the Arts and Sciences college. So you'll see, like, this is the College of Liberal Studies, this is the STEM college, this is the Social Science college. Most of the schools I've seen do that are the technical schools like MIT, Carnegie Mellon. And so you do need to be aware that a strategy of flipping majors real easily at those schools may not be as viable as at the more typical traditional structured universities. But the answer to your question is, like, if you apply to a traditional university like Cornell or Penn, you know, it's 100%. Like, if it exists in the college, they might have some requirements, like you have to take that math class or X, Y, Z. But if it exists in the college and you have the requisite GPA, you can declare it. If it does not exist in the college and you have to transfer, meaning an internal transfer at the university, I'm going to start at the College of Arts and Sciences, now I'm going to move to the College of Engineering. That's called an internal transfer. That varies significantly depending on university and the actual college that you're transferring from. So if you're at Penn and you want to transfer from Wharton to Arts and Sciences, no problem. That's going to happen. If you're at Penn and you want to go from Arts and Sciences to Wharton, that's never going to happen. if you're at Penn and you want to go from engineering to arts and sciences, probably pretty likely to happen. If you want to go from arts and sciences to engineering, probably likely to happen, but you're very likely to be at least one full year behind in the course sequence. So it really depends on from college to college at one university, it changes and it gets complex. You know, at Cornell, you got 7 colleges. It really, the transferability amongst those colleges depends on which college you're starting from and which college you're trying to go to.
Thank you. Thank you. Right now it's about 10:57, so I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we're going to closing up. So, John, you can move on to your work. I know you're also working very, very late, and Christy as well. Thank you. Last question is: my son is interested in pre-med. What kind of a major would be helpful for his goal except biology?
Good question. So I think, I always start this conversation by asking the student and parent, how important is it to you that you investigate the medical space in high school? To be clear, it's not important to the colleges, right? If you're applying to medical school, that's a graduate program. And just like they don't care if you want to be a lawyer, they don't care if you want to be a doctor, they don't care if you want to be a veterinarian, those are all graduate programs. So the first question that really needs to be asked is, how important is it to the student that they're involved in health-related spaces? Some students will say, like, well, I do want to become a physician, but if I can't do that right this second in 10th and 11th grade, that's fine. I can do it. I'm interested in policy. I'm interested in economics. I'm fine to do that. I just want the option of doing that when I get to college. That's one route. And in that storyline, I would say we move as far away from biology and pre-med as possible. Like, we forget that it exists, because that would be the best. If the student says, and that's usually not the case, students don't want to move all the way away from what they love. So usually they say, like, oh, okay, John, I hear you. Like, I hear it's more competitive, but I really would like to be, connected to the health space. So that's when generally we move to public health. Now, it is important to note that public health is a very wide field, wide ranging. I just noted that, I worked at Lehigh University before Cornell, and I have strong relationships with the people that work there. And one of my friends was just appointed the dean of the College of Health at Lehigh. And I was just looking through her resume, and her background is in health humanities, and her research was on how suffering is portrayed through literature. I promise you 100% that if her background was in epidemiology, she would not be the dean of the College of Health. And the reason for that is because everybody in public health wants epidemiology, all the students definitely, because that's the closest to what they actually want, which is medicine. And so when we talk about, like, let's move away from pre-med, you have to commit. Now, the first example I gave you was you completely ignore health. That's a real commitment. The second one is like, okay, we're going to keep health involved. We're going to be public health, but you got to commit to public health and not the epidemiology. I want to investigate diseases, but what other aspects of community decision-making, communication protocol, technology implementation, et cetera, could you investigate related to public health in your community? Generally, we start at the public health bureaus. We find out what issues there are, what their initiatives are, and we build from there. But this is a really important question that you have to commit to, and you can't do it part way. Like, oh yeah, I kind of want to stay away from bio and kind of want to stay away from pre-med, but I still want to go, shadow at the local hospital. I mean, if you shadow at the local hospital, they think you're pre-med. Nobody thinks that you're not pre-med if there's hospital shadowing the physicians, and that's what a lot of students want to do. So the short answer is public health, but that's a very complex answer. It used to be easy to say computer science, make them data science. Pre-med, make them public health. But a lot of people are doing that, and you have to do it the right way now. You have to lean all the way to the social science oriented versions of these conversations away from the STEM space.
Great. Thank you. I know there's a lot of more questions. We're just not able to have enough time to answer them. And I just wanted to thank John again for always wonderful, very impactful, and also lots of information to share with the audience. Your kind heart and your generosity is very much appreciated. And also thank you, Christy, for your time to represent associate consultant here to let us know what kind of quality we have for the implementation team side. So you together with John, I told parents they actually get, paying one price to get both work of the both sides, because then, you have John's leadership and also strategy and knowing the business so well, you also have someone has good education, care about the student and spending the time. The main thing is spending time thoroughly helping student to achieve to what John is looking for. So by putting two of you together, really accomplish what the best goal for your child and student. Thanks again for both of you. Thank Allison on the background for the technical support. Thank everyone spending time with us until now, 11 o'clock. We still have 250 people. Today, we're over 400. There's a 400 audience listening to our sharing. So it's a great opportunity to also have Christine put you in front of our potential community so they know who they're working with as well. So thank everyone. Looking forward to see you next time and have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. Thank you, Christy. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, John. Bye-bye.